All right, show of hands, who administers tests that are currently in this room? One, okay. There are your references, which you are aware of because you have them posted on your door for your test control room. And I saw them over at Second Battalion while you're currently in transition with the switching with the renovation. Next, please. Commander's responsibility is to appoint TCOs and make sure that they receive the appropriate training. Did you get your training from, because you're already with RTI, 1st Battalion, when you took over Sergeant Munson's stuff, correct?
Correct.
So you are already administering tests at that point, or?
Yes.
Desk one is to maintain duty appointment orders. Those are also posted on the test control room. And update as necessary. Next slide, please. QA to do the ISEs. The test control officer is also responsible for doing ISEs on his or her own test control area. But our job as a QA is to do a periodic ISE to make sure all the requirement documents are inside. You'll see some pictures further on down the slides as to what a good test control looks like. And then your respective battalion commanders is ensure the positions that come to the quarterly test control training, such as Sergeant Meyer, enforce mandatory attendance, again, Sergeant Meyer. And then just following 3-5 and the test control memorandum as far as setting up the classroom and the other stuff that we'll talk about here shortly. Next slide. Let's see. I'm gonna go down to something that we haven't already talked about, but
Why don't you talk about the test destruction inventory logs, how they do that, how that works?
well, what each proponent requires different things for destruction logs, or not destruction logs, but for destruction of testing materials. But everything that you do, anytime it comes in and out of the test control room where you just destroy a test after it's, I don't know, when do you destroy the tests?
Right after we're finished with it.
Okay, and that's all logged within the test control room?
Test control binder.
Okay, so you have it all documented, when you destroy in what tests and how many, right? You get a
Yes.
physical count of how many are destroyed?
Yes.
Okay. Test control inventory logs will be kept in the, test control room. And the only person that can sign these tests out, or hand them out, is the test control officer, or the, what is it, the assistant or the
Yep, alternate.
alternate, there you go, the alternate test control officer. Anything else you want covered on this slide?
Well, and then just talking about, again, there's a battalion SOP that talks about test control, but also looking at the regiment, and that we are making adjustments to our test control, and on the regiment SOP, which will be updated, the next, SRK, we put it in the notes to update for the next SOP review to reflect that when a test is drawn, or what was brought up during accreditation, was that in some cases, the test control officer was drawing the test out, but then simply giving it to the instructors or the course managers to then hand out to the students. And what was talked about in the accreditation is that we need to, if that's gonna be the case, they need to sub-hand receipt those and make sure you have accountability of those, to make sure that they're the entire time. Everyone was found a good job of keeping the test secured in between that, but there wasn't any handoff for those, so to speak. So that's where it leaves the, open that the test could be compromised if that's the case, so.
That'll be covered in a couple slides down here as when we add to it, so. Next slide. So the transportation material, and this is the next slide, all examinations will be inventoried and signed by the course manager or the test examiner. What that means is if the course manager is checking them out, the course manager is gonna be the one administering the test. As long as that course manager is, on the memo that's able to be able to sign these tests up. Each test examiner must sign for the respective test. And that's something that we got gigged on during accreditation, like Sergeant Kale was talking about. Course manager grabbed the test, run them over to where the classroom was being, actually lay them out on the table, and then the instructors would just come in and grab them. There was no accountability if one test were to go missing. It would fall back on that course manager because he was actually the last one to sign for that test. So now, talking with Second, what will happen once that test control room moves back, I'm just gonna take all the test administrators, all the instructors, and they're all gonna go out at the same time, and each one of them are gonna sign out tests. There was some question about, well, how do you contain that many instructors and get them all to do it at the same time? The answer is simple. You put your students on break, your instructors, test administrators, come sign their stuff out, bring it back to the room, problem solved, too easy. They'll be locked, placed in a locked container to be transported from the RTI to the test exam location, even when it's moving from the test control room to the instructor room or wherever. It's gonna be transported in such a way. Now, in your case, you're the one who's already signing for them, so you already have physical custody of them, so you're not transporting them. But if you were transporting them to off-site, say you're somewhere else, then that's a different story.
We still do.
Okay. And then your test sheets and your answer keys will be in separate containers. And then after the examination, everything will be returned back to the TCO, inventoried, signed in, and filed away. Any questions? Okay. So the test question analysis comes up every once in a while. Where is it in there? Okay.
40%.
So when there's a discrepancy or 40% or more of the students fail a particular test item, they'll do a test item certification committee consisting of no less than 3 cadre identified by the TCO. Basically what that means is they'll go through it and they'll analyze the question to see whether or not it was worded wrong or worded awkwardly. If there was several different possible answers, that would be acceptable. And if it's not valid, then everyone, it doesn't count against them. So everyone gets that question right. The commandant notifies the chief of the proponent that the test item determined by the TIC is defective. And then it's up to the proponent for them to change the wording, whatever. And there's that, what's the form that they have to fill out? You know, like if there's a,
Oh, you might go.
you know, if there's
Course.
like a discrepancy in the,
CCIR, of course.
yeah, that, but then there's a certain form where they can fill out if there's a discrepancy in the,
The POI.
POI and stuff
or
like that.
yeah.
so,
Maybe working with their individual proponents on that
Correct.
if they, and communicating with that if they're noticing
Right.
something.
right.
Did you guys notice anything, cause it was the new, in the recent year with going to new POI, was there any changes submitted?
Like, we did one for this past phase contest. 2 questions there.
Okay.
That was it.
Next slide, please.
That's,
And then this basically goes through questions that will be asked during the TIC. So right there, the one that we kind of talked about grammatically correct with only one correct response. What's your question? Is the item overly complex? I don't know how you're gonna determine the level of the learning style of your students if it requires several readings for the reader to understand. Some people have a harder time concentrating on questions, so. Next slide. I'm not gonna read this, you can read this on your own. 350-70-5. This is just a checklist that we had used in the past. I don't know if we're
I think you utilize what they want to, yeah.
but it can be utilized just going down. It's just a yes or no whether or not these. I mean, this would be something that you would be using down the road because we're required to go in and observe, testing from time to time as part of ISE and just as part of the SAB as well. So, and it's self-explanatory.
It's a good thing, so.
And here's how it should be posting. So you're gonna have on the right-hand side is the test control officer, alternate, and whoever else is authorized to administer tests. On the left, I believe that is the duty appointment. And then obviously the top is just showing you that's the test control room.
And these were the ones on the right where the people are authorized to give the test.
Yeah.
Yep. Listed on there. And this is really important that we're constantly, as the TCOs, like that you're checking these things as people come and go and whatnot. I'd say it's definitely part of a quarterly thing to make sure this is
Yeah.
getting updated. 'Cause
It
it's-
needs to be updated because as people leave and come and go, I mean, it's a matter of cranking out a new memo and just having it posted with the latest and greatest with names and stuff.
And that's not an easy one too for inspection, because we got like an OIP inspection coming up or anything like that. That's an easy, I gotcha type thing, is to look at this and look at that, so making sure that's always there.
And there's the TCOs and the elements.
Yep, this on there. And then this is probably old, when we were at the Ed Center, but I took a picture of it just showing, again, this was the sign in, sign out, so every time that someone would come in and take any tests out, that way we had a way of seeing who was in there to look at that. We also, the way it was set up over there was 1st Battalion had access only to 1st Battalion's tests, 2nd Battalion only had access to 2nd Battalion's tests. We did that by, right here, there's 2 separate lock boxes where the keys are kept for the filing cabinets in there. So that was another way too that we could make sure, because during the accreditation 2015, we got a gig because the cabinets were locked, but anyone from 1st could get them 2nd, vice versa. So that was a switch we made from 2015.
And that'll be maintained once we move back. Well, I think right now,
It doesn't
I
really,
don't know how they have it right
and he
now.
said right now though, their 1st Battalion's already, they're just keeping theirs archived anyways. For the most part, he's printing them and then shredding them right afterwards. Where 2nd is keeping their, unless they're also going through and check now if something got written on or whatever, then they would destroy it. But other than that, 2nd is keeping that. And again, POI is going to drive this too as things change. Sometimes there's the electronic testing versus paper pencil type tests. So
Yeah.
as things continue to change, it's staying on top of everything with Proponent.
And when you eventually do administer tests, the top one is, because that was a big thing, the 2nd. The test would be laid out, course manager might not even be in the room, and the tests are just laying there. So they need to be locked up until the test administrator comes out and grabs them. Don't make copies of the test. I know in times past, there's been practice where the good old review where he'd be going through questions and he'd just go knocking, and then that way the students, oh, okay, this must be something I need to pay attention to. And then students identity from military deep, if not familiar with the student. By the time you give your first test, I would hope that you're familiar with your students. You should be. Your post, your start and stop time, just put it up on the whiteboard clearly enough and legibly enough so everyone can see it. And then verbatim read the instructions. Don't deviate from it at all. Don't add to it, don't take away, just verbatim. And then the 5160 prior to start of the test, that's the I'm of sound mind, I don't need this, that, I don't need a break or whatnot.
If they do get students, which they've had a couple of times, so that's where they can go and talk to the hall and figure out what's going on.
Correct.
And there's AER sheets, again, that's where students are going through and they're answering it, but then they can also write down the answers in that, so that way those stay in the classroom and everyone gets done. And then you can go back in, go through the test, and then students kind of almost, they won't be grading their papers, but they'll know how they did on the test with that. It's imperative though that they're again there, those sheets are collected and shredded, as they have the answers on them.
Correct. And this is a kind of an integrity honor code type deal, if they see any cheating or anything along those. And I've never seen any problems with people giving the test that they wouldn't walk around, and with the way they have classrooms set up now, it's real easy just to make it real good.
Yep.
So,
They shouldn't be in the back of the room on their phones messing around. You should be actively engaged,
Right.
keeping an eye on what's going on. And speaking of phones, students, what do they? Well, it doesn't matter for first; they don't even have their phones. But for second, do you know what they're doing over there? If they collect them all, or they just say they have to be away. I'm not
I think
sure.
they just have, I think they say they have to be away, I don't think they collect them.
Yeah, I know it depends. In the proponent, or they would say what they want them to do with that.
Right. And here's the student's excuse for the foul. Red ink. And don't correct them in the classroom. Take them elsewhere, put your students on break, and correct them.
Yep, you
Just-
should be in the back of the room, so they're scoring them as the students are bringing them up and dropping them off. The answer key should never, ever come into the classroom. It should be in a separate location.
And then the individual students, you can give them their copy, you're just not gonna say, K-How, 82,
Yeah, you shouldn't do that.
Smooth, 43%. Free test, just give them a counseling and tell them what the next testing opportunity is. Usually the retest is usually scheduled, and I don't know how first does it, but it's generally like either at the end of the night or the next morning, because they're allowed to study hall.
Yep.
The night before.
And make sure, I think another thing that was, what was brought up is they should always be an instructor that should lead the retraining on that. It shouldn't just be put on students to retrain. Even if the person doesn't, it should be an instructor led. Now, students can also assist with that, but there should be an instructor providing some guidance with that.
Mhm.
Because we've had some where students then failed the second time, and they can come back and say, well, I didn't get proper retraining.
I didn't get retrained because there's no instructor there.
Yeah,
There's all
so
students.
that's a no-go.
Any questions?
I'll just end by saying test control is very important, and that's why we have quarterly test control meetings, to make sure that we're following through on these. You can see it was part of our accreditation, where we still, even though we're doing this stuff and talking about it, things are still slipping through the cracks, so it's very important to make sure we're following through on these procedures. If people have questions, they should ask, and not just say, oh, this is the way we always do it.
Any no further questions, comments, or concerns?
Nicely done.